Mr. President, I wanted to speak about the subject I referenced briefly, that is fiscal policy and this President. And it gives me no joy to come and be critical of the President's fiscal policy, but it should give the American people no joy either to understand the consequences of a fiscal policy that turns very large budget surpluses that took us a long time to begin to see into very long-term federal budget deficits and $3 trillion of additional debt. That is a reckless fiscal policy and one that has to be fixed. Now, the President said when asking the Congress for an additional $194 billion, none of it paid for, all emergency, he said, now we'll see whether the Congress supports the troops. Well, the fact is, not all that money goes to the troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. A substantial portion of that money goes to contractors. And I wanted to go through with my colleagues some examples of what we are finding with respect to the spending of taxpayers' money with contractors. I've held, I believe, 17 hearings over the recent 4 years as chairman of the Policy Committee on these issues. And let me put up a couple of charts just to describe where we're headed. This is a Congressional Budget Office estimate of October this year. The U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan could cost taxpayers up to $2.4 trillion by 2017 when you count the very large interest costs because this is being financed with borrowed money. Again, a president that says he's a conservative borrowing all of this money, insisting it be borrowed and not paid for, and we end up in this country paying a fortune for the war costs. So the question is this money for the troops? Well, let me describe what we have. Last month, military officials said that contracts worth $6 billion to provide essential supplies to American troops in Kuwait, Iraq, and Afghanistan, including food, water, and shelter, were under review by criminal investigators. In addition, $88 billion in contracts and programs, including those for body armor for soldiers and materiel for Iraqi and Afghan security forces, are being audited for financial irregularities. Think of that. $88 billion, $6 billion under criminal investigation, $88 billion financial irregularities by these contractors. Once again, Mr. President, last month, the Army reported that it had 78 cases of fraud and corruption under investigation, had obtained 20 criminal indictments, and uncovered over $15 million in bribes. Another $194 billion, while those that prance around this money have a field day? Doesn't seem like conservatism to me. Again in August, 2 months ago, the enormous expenditures of American and Iraqi money on the Iraq reconstruction program, at least $40 billion overall, have been criticized for reasons that go well beyond the corruption cases that have been uncovered so far. Weak oversight, poor planning, and endless security problems have contributed to many of the program failures. So we ante up money from the United States Congress, billions and billions of dollars. We're going to provide health care clinics for the Iraqis. We're going to do 142 health care clinics. Hire the contractor, the money's gone, but the clinics aren't there. An Iraqi doctor, a very courageous Iraqi doctor, testified at one of my hearings. He said, I went to the health minister in Iraq and said, you know, we had these American contracts with an American contracting company that was going to do these 142 health care clinics in Iraq. I'd like to visit them. The Iraqi health minister said to this physician, you don't understand. Most of those are imaginary clinics. Well, the American taxpayer got fleeced. The money's gone. The contractor got the money. The clinics don't exist. Here's one that 2 months ago piqued everybody's interest. We can't even keep track of the guns that are being sent to Iraq. We send Iraq 185,000 AK-47s, and at this point we know where 75,000 of them are, and 110,000 are gone and unaccounted for. Pistols, we send them 170,000 pistols. 80,000 of them, we can't account for them. Are some of these AK-47s and pistols being aimed at American troops? Of course they are. How is it that we fund with American taxpayers' money the shipment of massive quantities of weapons to Iraq and don't keep track of where they are? We have 110,000 AK-47s. We don't know where they are. 80,000 pistols. Don't know where they are. That is almost staggering incompetence in my judgment. Now, Mr. President, Saddam Hussein is dead. He was hanged by the neck. The Iraqi people no longer have Saddam Hussein in their lives. The Iraqi people voted for their own new constitution, and they voted for a new government. All that's left for the Iraqi people is to provide for their own security. The question is, when will the Iraqi people demonstrate the will to provide for their own security? Here's what we have done in that regard. We've trained 360,000 Iraqis have been trained in the interior forces, defense forces, soldiers, and policemen and women. 360,000 have been trained. And they can't provide for their own defense, for their own security? Is there not a will in this country in which Saddam Hussein is gone, a new constitution, a new government exists, and they have 360,000 people trained, and that training was paid for by this country? Is there not a will then to provide for security? If they can't, we can't. We are not going to provide security in Iraq for the next 5 or 10 years. We should not be going door to door in Baghdad in the middle of a civil war with U.S. soldiers. But it seems to me we should reasonably ask the question, if we have trained 360,000 for security in Iraq, and they can't provide for their own security, where are they? We are now told that up to 50% of those that we have trained are probably not on the job anymore, don't know where they are. And I also just uncovered information a couple of days ago that the number of people that we are training has dropped by 2/3. I mean, everyone talks about, including the President, the way out of Iraq is to train the Iraqis for their own security. We've trained 1/3 of them, and now we've reduced the amount of training by 2/3. And now we have a surge of American soldiers going door to door in Baghdad in the middle of a civil war. I'm just saying I don't think that adds up in the context of what this administration is asking of this Congress. Rear Admiral David Oliver, a Coalition Provisional Authority, which is us, by the way, the CPA is us, we created it. He was asked about what happened to the cash that was airlifted to Baghdad. You know, we had $100 bills on pallets. We airlifted billions of dollars in C-130s. Some was shoveled out of the back of pickup trucks in Baghdad. You think that doesn't attract flies and also people that want to cheat and steal? It does. What happened? We're told that somewhere $8.9 billion was unaccounted for. Our official says, quote, "I have no idea. I can't tell you whether the money went to the right things or didn't, nor do I actually think it's important." Oh, really? You don't think it's important whether billions of dollars were used for the proper purposes? Mr. President, between April 2003 and June of 2004, $12 billion in U.S. currency, much of it in $100 bills, was dispersed by the Coalition Provisional Authority, that's us. About $9 billion has gone missing, unaccounted for, in a frenzy of mismanagement and greed, it is said. Independent Oversight Agency reported this month it could not complete an audit of a $1.2 billion contract to train Iraqi police because records kept by the State Department and by DynCorp, the DynCorp International, the contractor, the records were inaccurate and disarray, documents not sufficient to do any kind of an audit. State Department paid $43.8 million for manufacturing and temporary storage of a residential camp that has never been used. They paid $36.4 million for weapons and equipment, including body armor, armored vehicles, and communications equipment that couldn't be accounted for. Among the problems identified before an audit, this is a New York Times story of this month, was duplicate payments, the purchase of a never-used $1.8 million X-ray screener, and payments of $387,000 to house DynCorp officials in hotels rather than other available accommodations. Well, you get my point. I could show 100 charts. All show, in my judgment, massive, staggering, incompetent lack of oversight of these contracts. The President says, I want $194 billion in emergency funding, none of it paid for, and by the way, if you don't support that, you're not supporting the troops. Well, a substantial amount of this money is supporting contractors, not troops. And there's substantial evidence that there is dramatic waste, fraud, and abuse in this contract, and no one seems to care. No one seems to be watching the store. And that goes for the Defense Department, the Secretary of State, and many, many others, including the White House.